Hi, I'm Matthew Martin, a director in our Cannabis Advisory Services team here at Citron Cooperman. And I'm here today with Mitzi Keating, our Cannabis Advisory Services Practice co-leader, to talk about the recently announced Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act. This act was unveiled July 14th, 2021. It's actually the first cannabis-related bill to originate in the Senate. So this is going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. Some important aspects of the bill are the removal of cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act, but still allowing states to enact and uphold prohibition laws. It establishes a minimum age for purchase of 21 years old, gives primary enforcement jurisdiction to FDA, Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives from the current jurisdiction of the DEA. Now, the more interesting fact is it establishes a means of taxation through an excise tax. It does this by starting off at a flat 10% and increasing 5% per year until it reaches a maximum tax rate of 25%. There is a small business of any business with 20 million or less of gross receipts that would be eligible for a 50% reduction in this excise tax, which would be established via a credit. The other interesting aspect of the taxation is after 5 years, this would move to a per ounce rate, which would be established similar to how alcohol is currently taxed.
Well, it's funny. We've seen different federal legislation that's been enacted I would say it's been enacted typically by the House. So we saw the House pass the Safe Banking Act. We saw the House pass the MORE Act. We've seen things where part of the federal government has really tried to enact some measure by which essentially they can tax cannabis at the federal level, which is really all it is. But currently with cannabis dispensaries, cultivators, those who traffic in controlled substances, meaning cannabis, they're paying federal tax on their gross margin. And a lot of people don't understand that. So if this act passes, then those businesses will be able to deduct their ordinary and necessary costs of doing business, just like any other business, and will be allowed to access credits and deductions and other tax planning opportunities, which they haven't been able to do so due to 280E and the limitations imposed upon them.
Well, the more interesting thing is when we're talking about taxes, if you talk about the effect of this for the different types of businesses. So if you're a cultivator, you're probably getting, 85 to 90% of your expenses. But if we're talking about a tax rate of 25%, that's certainly more than you're going to pay in taxes under the old method. So it really depends on who's going to benefit with the current proposed regime. One of the things I would stress is this is a discussion draft, and it's meant to not even pass until April 20th, 2022. So this is a long lead up, and they want lots and lots of changes and lots of discussion. But it really is interesting.
Well, I love the humor, at least in that they want it to pass on April 20th. So at least there's something coming from the federal government that makes this a little more humorous than it should be otherwise. But I agree. I mean, from a cash flow perspective, a 25% excise tax on gross receipts is pretty significant as compared to the impact of 280E. So I think buyer beware with regard to, how this is currently written. I agree. It's certainly a discussion point because I'm not sure that advocates should be getting behind it. Advocates of legalization, might not understand the tax flow impacts or the tax impacts and the cash flow impacts of this type of legislation.
Yeah, certainly. A couple other interesting provisions was it extends a more robust research position. Currently, I think there's only 2 or 3 facilities that are testing and able to, come up with what is working for cannabis. And they're using like 20-year-old cannabis. So it's like whatever data points they're getting are not useful. So this would establish a more robust platform where we could get real data and see what the true benefits of cannabis is.
I think the big benefit that we see, at least with the introduction of a piece of legislation like this, is that people are actually, or the federal government is actually realizing that these are legitimate businesses. Now, there's always that dichotomy, right, between it's still federally illegal. It's legal in certain states, in certain avenues, medicinal or for adult use, or not legal at all in some of these states. And what is really kind of interesting is it's a first step by the federal government. Well, it's not a first step. This has happened before with, the Safe Banking Act and some other, pieces of legislation that have been introduced and maybe passed by one branch of government. But it's just an acknowledgement that this is something that needs to be discussed, and people are putting it out there on the table to have a discussion on. So it's positive movement in that regard. But again, a 25% excise tax isn't really positive for anybody who's really participating in the cannabis industry.
No, and I think it's important to note there's like 75% of the states that have some kind of legalization on books, which is either the medical use or the adult use. And when you're talking about that many states, you've got to imagine that some sort of legalization comes through. So if it's this bill, some other bill, this is definitely one of the first bills where they were taking all the different ideas from all the other various proposed bills that were out there, or the ones that passed, and kind of combining and say, this is what an overhaul could look like.
Yeah, and ironically enough, right, it's federally illegal, yet at the same time, most of the work that we do, not all of it, but we help clients participating in the state legal, federally illegal business file and pay their federal income taxes on that income. So the federal government and the IRS will take your money, but it's still federally illegal. So this might be an avenue by which the kind of, I won't call it hypocrisy, but by which that kind of, that problem is resolved. Legalization will at least address that discrepancy in practice between the federal government taking revenue related to it, but still calling it federally illegal.
Well, Clarence Thomas, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, specifically said, the current policy is half in, half out. So when it benefits the U.S. government, they're in, and when it doesn't, they're out. And this really changes it to get everybody on the same page, for sure.
Absolutely. So I think with that, I think our time is up on this. So for more quick cannabis hits like this on the latest legislation and news updates, check out the Cannabis Content Hub at the Citron Cooperman website and sign up for our newsletter by the link above. Matt, thank you. Always a pleasure to speak with you about all of these various items. And until next time.